hadn't been living in the place more than 2 weeks when I started hearing it. Just after midnight, soft and slow like a heavy animal shifting on old wood. Creak, pause, creak. I'd lay still in bed, listening to it move from one end of the house to the other, always under the floor. It never seemed to go up walls or knock anything over, just stay down there, sliding along the beams like it knew the layout better than I did. The house itself was a rental, cheap, run down, perched on concrete piers with a crawl space underneath that was barely high enough for a child to sit upright. I'd taken it because it was all I could afford after the divorce, and the owner didn't ask many questions. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. During the day, it was quiet, peaceful even. Sun came through the dusty blinds. The window AC buzzed like an old fridge. I worked odd jobs around town, mostly handyman gigs, and kept to myself. The house didn't seem haunted, just old. The kind of place that had seen a lot of tenants and not much maintenance. It was the third night when something changed. I was fixing a busted table leg in the living room, kneeling down beside it, tools spread out on the floor. I'd just set my ratchet down when I heard the creak again, closer this time, like it was right beneath the subfloor. I paused, listened, then leaned over to grab the wrench again, but it wasn't where I left it. I looked around. Nothing. I got on my hands and knees, thinking it had rolled under the couch, and lifted the skirt of the faded old fabric. It was dark underneath, but I could see a glint of metal near the back corner. I reached for it. My fingers had just brushed the cold steel when something shifted. There was a tug, quick, sharp, and a white-hot flash of pain across the top of my hand. I jerked back and slammed my head into the edge of the coffee table. "Son of a bitch," I hissed, clutching my wrist. Blood smeared my knuckles, just shallow cuts, but something had scraped me good. I turned on the flashlight app on my phone and scanned under the couch again. Nothing. No tool. No movement. Just dust, dead crickets, and something lumpy pushed back into the shadows. Looked like a wad of cloth. Maybe an old blanket or insulation. I didn't remember seeing that before. I stood up slowly. The house was quiet. No wind, no traffic outside, just the dull hum of the AC. I ended up eating dinner with one hand, favoring the one that had been scratched. It wasn't deep, but the skin felt bruised, not like a cut from metal, more like a hand had grabbed me hard and let go. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had creaked beneath the floor hadn't left. I cleaned up the living room and tried to brush it off. Old house, maybe a rat nest, maybe loose springs under the couch. I wasn't new to weird little injuries, but that didn't explain how the wrench had just vanished. Next morning I crawled under the couch again. Nothing. Not even the cloth lump I thought I saw the night before. I pulled the couch out into the middle of the room, swept under it, lifted the cushions, no tool, no weird insulation, just a dull patch of floor. I even checked the crawl space door out back. It was a wooden hatch, about 2 feet wide, secured with a rusted bolt. I slid it open and shone a flashlight inside. Just damp soil, wooden joists, plastic sheeting. Low clearance, tight. The kind of space where spiders owned the lease and things died slowly. I hated crawl spaces, always had. I shut the hatch and forgot about it, or tried to. That night, the creaking came back, but now it circled the house, not random anymore. I could follow it with my ears, from the front bedroom, down the hall, through the kitchen. When it passed beneath the living room, my dog, Charlie, started growling, real low, real steady, his ears pinned back. I shushed him, but he didn't stop, just stared at the floor, lip twitching. Then the sound faded. Charlie didn't bark again that night, but he wouldn't leave my side. I kept my shoes on to bed. The next few days I was on a roofing job, up on ladders, crawling attic beams, blistering heat. My hand scabbed over, but I couldn't help flexing it every so often, as if waiting for that bruised feeling to come back. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. No, what I thought I saw. Fingers? A cloth-wrapped shape? Probably just trash caught under the couch. I needed to stop thinking about it. Needed to sleep. But then my watch went missing. It wasn't anything fancy. A battered black Casio I'd worn for years with a Velcro strap and a crack through the screen. Always kept it on my nightstand. I remember taking it off before bed, but the next morning, gone. I tore the room apart, looked under the bed, behind the dresser, even in the laundry basket. Nothing. That was when I noticed a faint stain near the floor vent in the bedroom. It looked wet, but the floor around it was dry. I knelt down to check and caught the faintest smell, mildew and something sharp, like rust or battery acid. The grate was dusty but intact. I unscrewed it and peered inside with a flashlight. Nothing moved, but deep inside, toward the junction where the vent turned toward the living room, something caught the light. It looked soft, frayed, almost like a blanket wedged between the ducts or insulation. That afternoon, I picked up a cheap trail cam from the pawn shop, the kind hunters use. Motion sensor, low res. I rigged it to face the living room floor vent and let it run overnight. The footage was mostly black. Hours passed, but at 3:12 a.m., something moved. Just a flicker, then a shape, round, sluggish, dragging past the grate. It didn't look like an animal. No fur, no tail, just folds of cloth and skin, maybe both. Something about it reminded me of a discarded pile of laundry, but it moved with purpose. Then came the fingers, stubby, greasy. They slithered up through the vent slats, feeling blindly across the hardwood floor. One curled toward the couch, another scraped at the edge of the rug, and then nothing. They slid back down and were gone. I sat there staring at the footage for half an hour, not breathing. The room felt smaller, the air hotter. It hadn't made a sound, not a damn sound, and it was real. I didn't sleep the next night. I kept the lights on in every room and sat in the living room with Charlie curled up beside me. The trail cam footage open on my laptop like I expected it to change. I watched the timestamp over and over, 3:12 a.m. Every time those fingers curled up through the grate, I felt my skin crawl a little deeper. I kept the hammer I'd been using earlier on the floor next to my foot. Every few minutes, I glanced at the vent. Nothing moved. Charlie lifted his head once and gave a low growl, but it passed. He didn't bark. He didn't even get up. Around 5 in the morning, I drifted off for maybe 10 minutes. When I jolted awake, the laptop battery was dead, and the room had gone quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before a house settles or after a refrigerator kicks off. Thick and waiting. I checked the time, 5:12 a.m. I stood up, stretched, and took Charlie outside. The sun was just rising over the fence. I looked back at the house, at the crusted vents and loose lattice around the crawl space. The thing had to be under there, somewhere, living, sleeping, maybe digesting whatever it took from people like me. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew what it did. Waited. That was its whole thing. It never came for you. It didn't charge or chase. It just waited. Waited for you to reach, for you to kneel, for you to do what you'd always done without thinking. That made it worse somehow. I went about my day, trying to get through a drywall patch job over on Pine Street. But I was distracted. Every time I dropped a screw or leaned down to grab a tool, my whole body tensed. I found myself using my foot to nudge things closer before reaching. I kept checking my fingers for scratches. That evening, I stopped at the diner for a burger, and while I was sitting at the counter, one of the old-timers from the neighborhood slid onto the stool beside me. I'd seen him before, stooped back, work boots, smoked like a chimney. Name was Wendell. Owned the rusted Ford parked 3 houses down.
"You're staying in the Latcher place, right?"
he asked, flicking ash into his cup of coffee like it belonged there. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Why?" He took a long drag from his cigarette and nodded like he expected that answer. "Don't reach under the damn furniture. That's all I'll say." My blood ran cold. I turned in my seat. "What?" He blew smoke through his nose, you heard me. Ain't a rat problem, ain't bad pipes. It's a waitin' kind of thing. Been there long as I can remember, just keeps taking, like it collects. You reach where you can't see, something goes with it. You're serious? I asked, voice lower than I intended. Wendell looked at me, dead-eyed. You ever meet a man who dropped his keys in the dark and thought twice about going for 'em? Probably not. But you will? I paid my tab and left without finishing my fries. Back home, the hallway felt longer than usual. I stepped over every vent, left all the lights on again. I even pushed the couch back 6 inches from the wall, gave it space, like that would do anything. Around 10, I noticed something else was missing, my spare key. I always kept it in the bowl by the door. I remembered tossing it in that morning, but now it was gone. I checked the bowl, the floor, my pockets. I turned over cushions and shook out my tool bag. Nothing. Charlie sat at the edge of the kitchen, watching me with his head tilted. I looked at the vent near the door and didn't want to get close. I grabbed my phone, set it to video, and extended my arm carefully toward the grate. The screen showed the inside, same as always, dust, gunk. But in the far corner, something lumpy and covered in grime, the blanket. I felt it before I even thought about it. My hand was too close. The space between my fingers and the slats suddenly felt unsafe, like gravity changed. I yanked my hand back and hit record. Then I set the phone down on the floor, propped up against a boot, filming the vent straight on. I sat on the couch and waited. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Charlie dozed off, my eyelids got heavy. Then the phone vibrated, motion detected. I snatched it up. The video played. For a few seconds, the vent was still. Then something shifted beneath it, just the faintest drag of moldy fabric. Then came the fingers, thicker this time. Less like a child's, more like hands that had swollen in a bog. They flexed as they came up through the grate and paused, felt around in silence. They searched for something that wasn't there. Then they slowly pulled back into the dark. I watched the clip 6 times. My breath fogged the screen, and I realized something awful. They weren't searching aimlessly anymore. They were expecting. Later that night, Charlie wouldn't go near the floor vents. I left my boots and toolbox on top of them just to be sure. I duct taped a few of the grates shut, piled bricks from the yard on the rest. The entire living room smelled like damp rust and stale glue. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw Wendell smoking on his porch. "You hear anything last night?" I asked. He didn't answer at first, just flicked his cigarette into a can and scratched his ear. "You know a girl went missing from that house, right?" he said finally. "About 7 years back. She lived there with her dad. Cops looked for weeks, thought maybe the father had done it, but he swore she'd been playing in the living room and dropped a marble. Reached for it under the couch. He turned around and she was gone. No trace, just a damn draft." My stomach turned. "They say he went mad," Wendell continued. "Tore up every board in that house trying to find where she'd gone. Swore something lived under there. Nobody believed him. He left town in a straitjacket. And no one looked deeper." Wendell met my eyes, 'cause we knew better. That night I moved everything I owned off the floors, put my mattress on top of the kitchen table, stacked furniture on cinder blocks, pushed my bed away from every vent, and sealed the crawl space hatch shut with 6 concrete pavers. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't hear anything either, until morning. Charlie's barking woke me, low, persistent, not panicked but focused. I found him standing in the hallway, tail stiff, staring at the vent outside the bathroom. The metal slats were pushed up from underneath, only by a few millimeters, but that was new. I got a flashlight and crouched nearby, not close enough to reach, just enough to shine the beam into the vent. There, at the edge of the metal, something moved. A fold of stained yellow cloth barely shifting, and nestled against it, something smooth and round. I zoomed in. My missing watch. It was wedged between layers of wet insulation and black mold, just sitting there like a gift. Or a trap. I didn't take it. I stood up, backed away slowly, and pulled Charlie with me. Whatever that thing was, under my house, under my floor, maybe even behind the walls now, it didn't care if I knew. It was patient. I didn't go near the vents after that. Didn't even look directly at them. Just kept to the center of every room and made damn sure nothing dropped, nothing rolled, nothing got close. I wore cargo pants with sealed pockets and kept every tool clipped or zippered shut. I even started placing things deliberately on top of counters, like I was prepping for an earthquake. Charlie wouldn't walk near the kitchen vent anymore. He used to lay there for hours, snoring and twitching. Now he avoided the whole side of the house, slept in the hallway with his nose against the front door. But the house wasn't quiet. It got subtler, like whatever was down there had started testing me. The floorboards would groan with soft weight when I walked into a room. A distant thud would sound behind the wall, slow and heavy like something bumping into a stud. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the timing wasn't random. It waited until I was kneeling, until I was bent over the sink, until my back was turned. I needed to see it again, not a glimpse through a vent, not fuzzy camera footage. I wanted to know what the hell I was dealing with, so I bought a new trail camera, better resolution, infrared, longer battery life, and installed it low to the ground, facing the floor vent in the bedroom where my watch had been. This time, I set bait. I dropped a silver spoon from the kitchen into the corner near the grate, something small, reflective, and easy to miss unless you were looking for it. Then I turned off the lights, shut the bedroom door, and went to sit in the living room. Charlie paced. Every so often he'd stop and listen, ears twitching. Hours passed. At 2:57 a.m., I heard it, barely a whisper of movement, like fabric dragging over plywood. Charlie let out a low growl. I waited another 30 minutes, then got up, retrieved the camera, and brought it into the kitchen to review the footage. What I saw made my hands go cold. The spoon sat there untouched for a long stretch of static gray silence. Then, at 3:09, something began to rise behind the grate. A lumpy, sagging form. It pressed against the metal like a bag of wet rags. Slowly, stubby fingers curled up through the slats. They groped forward, greasy and twitching. One of them hooked the spoon. It didn't pull away. It just held it. Then more fingers appeared, pushing from different angles. Some had dark nails. Others were swollen or raw, like they'd been chewed. They all converged on the spoon, prodding it, caressing it, like they didn't understand what it was but liked that it was there. Then, at 3:12 on the dot, they slipped back down, spoon and all. I scrubbed through the footage frame by frame, pausing on the fingers, trying to count them. I gave up at 14. They came from different points, not from a single hand, not from a human body. And something else, in one of the last frames, just before the fingers vanished, the edge of the blanket thing pressed close enough to the grate that I could see underneath it. What I saw wasn't flesh, it wasn't fabric either. It looked like old insulation stuffed with hair and pus. I leaned back and stared at the screen, suddenly very aware of every vent, every baseboard gap, every opening in the house. I didn't sleep again that night. I spent the next day sealing the bedroom off. I pushed Charlie's crate into the doorframe, moved the dresser in behind it, packed the closet with old paint cans and sealed the window with trash bags and duct tape. Not because I thought it would keep the thing out, but because I didn't want to see it again. But the sound followed me. Wherever I went in the house, I heard faint thumps beneath the floor. Not constant, just occasional little knocks, like elbows bumping against joists, like knees dragging across beams. Once, while brushing my teeth, I dropped my toothbrush on the bathroom tile. It rolled toward the vanity. I kicked it back with my foot and froze. There was a vent under the vanity. I'd forgotten. The toothbrush sat there, half in, half out of the shadows. I waited a full minute before using tongs to pick it up. That night, I decided to leave the camera running in the kitchen instead. I didn't bait it this time. I just wanted to know where it traveled. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor triggered again, and what it caught was worse than I expected. The thing didn't come up through the grate. It came up through the seam between the tiles. At first, it looked like a dark patch spreading across the floor. Then it bulged, splitting outward with that same layered, matted material. Blanket? Skin? Something between both. Fingers pressed up through the cracks, wet and stiff. They probed the tile, found nothing, and retreated. I paused the video, rewound, watched again. The floor hadn't broken, it had just parted. That meant it wasn't limited to vents. It could come through anywhere there was space, anywhere dark and low. I wanted to leave, pack my bag, grab Charlie, and drive until the gas ran out. But the thing had my tools, my watch, my damn keys. It had been living under me the whole time. It knew the shape of my house, and now I knew it was expanding. It wasn't hunting, it was reaching. I kept reviewing the footage the next morning, and something else stood out. At the very end of the kitchen clip, just before the fingers withdrew, something larger moved. It was just a blur, just for a second, but the mass behind the insulation shifted in a way that implied size, like a shoulder shrugging, or a torso rolling over. That was the first time I thought, this thing's bigger than I thought. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was under the house. That afternoon, I dragged a flashlight, a screwdriver, and a box cutter out to the backyard. Charlie stayed on the porch whining. I pulled the crawlspace hatch open. The air hit me first, musty and wet, like mildew soaked into old carpet. I ducked down and shone my light inside. The beam revealed dirt, low beams, dangling insulation, some of it blackened and curling, no movement, no obvious signs of life. I slid in on my stomach, elbows grinding against the earth. The flashlight's beam wavered across the plastic sheeting and concrete supports. I kept crawling. 10 feet in, I saw the first pile. It was tucked behind a wooden beam, half buried in silt. A crusty old baby shoe, a broken watch, a rusted belt buckle, all laid out in a neat little row. Trophies. Another 10 feet and I saw more, bent forks, pieces of chewed-up toothbrushes, a hairbrush, a dog tag. Then I heard the creak above me, floorboards shifting, something directly overhead. I froze. The beam trembled in my hand. My chest rose and fell too fast, sucking in that wet, moldy air. And then I saw it, only a foot ahead, a mound of rags, blankets. No, not cloth, not really. The color was wrong, too yellow, too organic. And from its side a hand, not a full hand, just the fingers, 5 stubby digits, greasy and grayish, pushing through the side like a baby's arm caught in plastic wrap. The fingers twitched once. Slowly. I didn't wait to see more. I backed out, fast and clumsy, elbows scraping, mouth dry. My foot caught on a root and I twisted hard, thudding my shoulder into the hatch frame. But I got out. Charlie barked when he saw me. I slammed the hatch and threw bricks over it until the wood groaned. Back inside, I paced the living room with dirt still on my knees. It lived under my house, not some rat, not a vagrant, not anything I could reason with or poison or burn out. It was burrowed in, and now that I'd seen it, I was sure of one thing. It had no face, it had fingers instead. I didn't go back under the house, didn't need to. I'd seen enough. The way those fingers pressed through the side of its own body, like it wasn't wearing those blankets or stuffed with that insulation but made of them, was burned into my head. That twitching gray flesh, the way it lay there like it didn't care I was watching. I locked the crawlspace hatch with a heavy chain and buried the concrete blocks half a foot deep over the doorframe. Charlie wouldn't stop pacing. He kept looking at the floor like something was whispering just below it. That night he wouldn't go near the bedroom, even with the door closed. He curled up on the hallway rug, as far from the vents as he could get. I slept sitting up in the recliner with a flashlight across my lap and a claw hammer in one hand. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to the gas station for coffee and stood there half-dazed under the flickering fluorescent lights. Wendell was there again, by the paper rack, leafing through a tattered hunting magazine. I told him everything. Not because I wanted help. Hell, I don't think I even believed I'd get any, but because someone needed to hear it, all of it. What I saw in the crawl space, what I filmed, what it did. He didn't interrupt, didn't scoff or look away, just lit a cigarette inside the store, even though the clerk shouted at him not to. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "That thing don't move like a man. It ain't got bones." I waited. He continued, "My brother lived in that house back in '92. Only lasted 6 months, lost 2 cats. Then his girlfriend's kid reached under the fridge one night, came up screaming, 3 fingers just gone, like something bit him off clean, but there wasn't no blood, just smooth skin." I stared at him. Thought he was making it up until I saw the kid at the hospital. They thought it was some congenital defect. But I know what I saw. Wendell pulled a battered keyring from his pocket and thumbed through it until he found a tiny brass key. "Come by my place. I got something you should see." I followed him home after grabbing my coffee. His house was barely standing, roof sagging, porch soft. Inside it smelled like ash and tobacco, with piles of old newspapers stacked waist-high along the walls. He led me to a back room where he pulled an old crate from beneath a tarp chair. Inside were folders, photos, yellowed newspaper clippings. He handed me one. "Local girl vanishes, no trace found in East Hollow home." The photo showed a different house, but the name stopped me. Latcher, same as the property record. She wasn't the first, Wendell said, flipping through more. But she was the first they printed about. 12 years old, dropped a marble under the couch. Her dad turned away to grab a broom. When he turned back, the couch was just sitting there. Marble was gone. She was gone. He handed me another photo, blurry, looked like it was taken through a screen door. In the background behind the porch steps, something was sagging, a bulge of gray. If you squinted, it almost looked like a pile of laundry, or a huddled shape trying to disappear under the house. "This one was mine," Wendell said. "Took it the night after I helped board up the Latcher place. Didn't see it till I got the film back." I handed it back carefully. "Why didn't anyone do anything?" He shrugged. "You ever try explaining that to a cop? 'Sorry, officer, a wet pile of insulation under my house ate my niece.' Nah. Folks just moved on. Learn to be careful. Tell their kids not to reach where they can't see. Some of us remember better than others." I sat back, taking it all in. "This thing, it doesn't chase, doesn't hunt, it waits," I said. Wendell nodded. "It's not a predator. Not really. It's a trap. A living trap. Always open. Always hungry." That word lodged in my head. Trap. That was exactly what it felt like the thing itself was bait, like the fingers and the blankets and the warm pile of junk was just the top of something much deeper. Wendell clapped me on the shoulder. "If you got a crawl space, you ain't got a house. You got a mouth with shingles." I left not long after, stomach tight, mind spinning. I walked back home with my eyes on the sidewalk the whole way. Every time I passed a vent or a storm drain, I kept my feet wide, just in case. At the house, I didn't go inside right away. I stood by the lattice skirting, listening. Nothing. But that didn't mean it was gone. Inside, I moved through each room slowly, checking every vent and corner. The bricks I'd piled on top of the grates were still there, unmoved. The camera in the kitchen was off, battery dead. I swapped it out, but I didn't review the footage. I already knew what it would show. I spent the evening sealing the baseboards with spray foam. I caulked the seams of every vent I could reach, covered every low gap with duct tape and wood panels. I even glued metal sheeting over the small square behind the toilet, where the previous tenant had cut into the drywall for a pipe leak. But the thing is, when something waits long enough, it doesn't need to break in. You start making the mistakes for it. Later that night, I dropped my keys behind the refrigerator. It was stupid. I was shifting some boxes and they slipped out of my jacket pocket and clattered behind the appliance. I froze mid-movement. I knew not to reach, but I could see them, half lit by the kitchen light, resting between 2 coils, barely out of reach. So I grabbed a wooden spoon, slid it behind the fridge and gently nudged the keys forward. But the gap was narrow, the angle was bad. I had to kneel to get better leverage. My knee touched the tile, and something scraped beneath the floor. Not loud, just enough to feel. Charlie whined from the hallway. I pressed the spoon again, too hard. The keys slid to the right, disappearing behind the kick plate. Gone. I sat back on my heels and stared. The fridge was bolted to the cabinetry, sealed in. I couldn't pull it without tools, and I'd left my tool bag in the bedroom, which I'd sealed shut. I sat there a full 10 minutes, just thinking. Then I got up, grabbed a crowbar from the hallway closet, and started pulling off the kitchen kickplate panel. The metal screeched, came free with a pop, and exposed the crawlspace void behind the fridge. I knelt again, shined my flashlight into the darkness. There, near the far wall, my keys, sitting on a pile of dust and grime and loose insulation. I didn't reach. I got a metal coat hanger from the closet and bent it into a hook, laid flat on the floor, stretched my arm forward slowly, carefully. Something brushed my hand, not grabbed, not pulled, just touched, like a finger tracing my knuckle. I yanked back hard and heard a low thud behind the wall. The keys were gone again. I slammed the panel back in place and drove 2 screws through the corners. Whatever it was had almost weighted me out. I didn't try to get the keys again. I didn't try to sleep either. Instead, I pulled out one last thing from the hallway closet, a 6-foot pry bar I'd only used once to lift a rotted deck beam. I was going under again. I wanted to see what else it had taken. I waited until daylight. Didn't matter that the thing moved mostly at night. I needed sun overhead, something warm to remind me the world above still existed. I dragged the pry bar across the yard, unchained the crawlspace hatch, and pulled it open. The air that rose out wasn't just damp this time. It reeked, like wet carpets soaked in sewage and left in a closed car for a week. I gagged and pulled my shirt up over my nose. Charlie stood at the fence and whined, low and mournful. I didn't ask him to come closer. I slid inside on my elbows again. The flashlight beam caught on old soda cans, mouse droppings, a pair of yellowed socks. I kept low and slow, careful not to scrape my back on the joists. About 15 feet in, I started seeing the piles again. Not just random debris now, arranged things. A line of broken cell phones, bottle caps organized by color, a chewed-up hairbrush, my missing wrench half buried in dirt and wrapped in a strip of what looked like thermal insulation. I stared at it. There was something wrong with the pile it sat in. At first it looked like clumped dirt, but when I brushed some away, I found a tiny shoe, a baby shoe, brown leather, the kind with little punched flowers in the front. Under it something pale. I pulled back more dirt and froze. It was a tooth, not animal, human, molar. I dropped it and scooted back, breath short. My fingers shook. My flashlight jittered across the space in front of me, and that's when I saw it again. Not the whole thing, just a section of its body. The mound of cloth and insulation lay half slumped against the wall near a cluster of bricks. From within its folds, greasy fingers shifted. Some curled around the floor joists like they were part of the wood. Others scraped in slow circles like they were digging, but there was no hole beneath them. Just the same dead crawlspace dirt. One of the arms lifted, sluggishly. It didn't reach for me. It just hovered, twitching, like it was expecting something to be placed there. A trade. I stayed still, let my light fall slightly to the side. That's when I noticed the thing wasn't resting, it was growing. Its body stretched under the beams like a root system, trailing off in dozens of narrow tunnels, flattened passageways it had shaped over time. I could see them now, veins of matted cloth and lumpy insulation pushing into the far corners beneath my house, forming nests, feelers, limbs. It wasn't just under the house. It was the floor. I turned to crawl back, but my leg hit something. Movement, not from the creature, from the space behind me. I whipped around, flashlight flaring against a fresh mound of loose dirt. The soil shifted. A wet hand slithered out from beneath it, thin, boneless looking. It curled toward my boot like a worm hungry for heat. I kicked hard and scrambled backward. My foot landed wrong, twisted sideways, and I hit the ground with a sharp bark of pain. The flashlight fell from my hand and rolled once. The beam landed on something I hadn't seen. A face, but not one with eyes or a mouth. It was a pressing shape in the fabric of the creature, like something buried within the insulation, flattened against it, frozen in the act of screaming. Just a faint imprint of bone beneath layers of soaked material, like it had been absorbed. I hauled myself back, dragging my leg. The fingers twitched but didn't follow. The shape under the fabric sagged, uninterested. I burst out into the yard, gasping. Charlie barked once. I rolled onto my back and stared at the clouds like they were the first real thing I'd seen in days. My ankle throbbed. Not broken, but close. I crawled to the porch, pulled myself up the steps and slammed the back door shut. Then I locked it, nailed it, and sat with my head in my hands. It wanted pieces of me. It had already taken a wrench, a key, a watch. Now it had part of my sanity, and I knew deep down I'd given it everything it wanted just by crawling down there, just by looking. I limped through the house and pulled all the furniture into the center of the rooms again. I stacked plates in the sink and covered every floor opening with plywood and concrete blocks. Charlie followed me, ears back, tail down. He wouldn't leave my side. That night, I lay on the kitchen table again, flashlight in hand, and I listened. At 2:41 a.m., I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard before. A sigh, not from above or below, from within the walls. A slow exhale, wet and long, like air being pushed through soaked cloth, followed by a faint thud, then another, then a scrape. I stood, limping, and crossed the kitchen. The wall behind the fridge bulged outward slightly, not much, just enough to cast a new shadow. I backed away. The thing wasn't just in the crawl space anymore. It was pressing upward, growing toward me, following the heat, the movement, the habit. I ripped open the hallway closet and grabbed every tool I had, screws, brackets, panels, the drill. I braced every damn wall vent with steel, resealed the bathroom pipe access. I even covered the tiny return grate in the hallway with duct tape and aluminum flashing. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the house, sweating, breathing hard, and looking around like I expected something to burst through the floor. It didn't. That was the worst part. It never came fast. It didn't need to. It just waited. For the next 2 nights, nothing happened. No creaks, no dragging, no missing items. I started to think maybe I'd scared it off. Maybe my hammering and sealing and clawing had made the house less inviting. Then on the 3rd morning, I opened the cabinet under the sink and saw insulation. A chunk of yellow, wet fiberglass wedged behind the trash bags. A single, stubby gray finger poking through it, curled inward like it was resting. There was no hole, no visible entry, just the insulation in that finger. I didn't touch it. I didn't scream. I just shut the cabinet. It was in the house now. I didn't open that cabinet again. Not that day. Not the next. Not even to throw away trash. I started bagging it and tossing it straight into the bin outside. I knew if I opened that door again, I might see more than a finger. I might see where it led. But the house was changing. It started small. My socks, once folded in drawers, began turning up in the living room. Wet, dirty. Like they'd been dragged across the floor and set down gently in the middle of the rug, the kind of thing I would have blamed on Charlie if they hadn't been placed in the exact same spot. Every time. One morning, my toothbrush was missing again, not just moved, gone. I found the handle in the bathtub that evening, chewed and soft, like someone had been gnawing on the plastic. But the bristles weren't there, just the stem. Charlie stopped barking at the vents. He stopped making noise altogether. Just followed me around with his tail down, ears flat. He didn't want to be alone, even in the bathroom. I let him sleep on the couch with me that night, though neither of us slept. Around 4 a.m., I swear I heard something move inside the walls again. Not skittering, not dragging, just settling, like weight. The next morning, I noticed the laundry basket was damp. Not the clothes inside, those were dry. But the bottom of the basket itself had a dark stain that hadn't been there before. I lifted it and found a clump of yellow insulation stuck to the underside, right in the middle of the living room. No vents nearby, no explanation. I was starting to feel like it had stopped caring whether I noticed. That night, I sat with a flashlight pointed at the bathroom door. I'd locked it earlier, tied a rope around the handle. I didn't even need to use the bathroom anymore. I pissed in a bottle and dumped it outside. At some point, I must have fallen asleep sitting up. Charlie jolted me awake with a whine, quiet, panicked. He was staring at the hallway. I followed his gaze. A dark trail ran from the bathroom door down the hardwood, wet, sticky, like something had been dragged or had dragged itself from the cabinet and across the hall. The door was still locked, the rope still tight, but the seal around the floor was peeled back on one side, just enough space for something to squeeze through. I didn't follow the trail. I couldn't, because I saw where it went, right up to the baseboard beneath my bed. Not the couch I'd been sleeping on, the bedroom bed, the one I hadn't used in a week, the one I'd sealed off with plywood and foam. I didn't even hear it open. I stood at the edge of the hallway staring at the bedroom door. It was cracked now, no lights inside, just the faint smell of rot wafting through the frame. I sealed that door again, drilled it shut, jammed furniture against it. Then I moved the kitchen table to block the hallway entirely. That room was no longer part of the house. The next day, I found the spoon I'd originally used as bait weeks earlier. It was sitting on the windowsill, clean, shiny, the same spoon. But it wasn't mine anymore. I grabbed it with a rag and tossed it outside. Then I packed a bag. I had every intention of leaving. I didn't care about the deposit, or my tools, or even my pride. I was ready to get in the truck and drive to the next town, to sleep in the cab if I had to. But the keys weren't where I left them. Again, I didn't even panic this time. I just sat on the porch with Charlie beside me, watching the sun go down, wondering how many little things had to go missing before I started to disappear with them. I couldn't keep living like that. So I made a plan. Burn it out. I'd patch the crawl space shut, seal every interior opening. Then I'd toss kerosene down the hatch and light the bastard up. Kill it where it lived, if it was even killable. I spent the next day prepping. I used expanding foam around every vent and pipe, screwed thick plywood over all the grates, moved furniture to cover every low point. By the time I was done, the house looked like it was mid-renovation, but it felt tighter, like I was finally walling the thing in. Then I poured 2 full cans of kerosene through the crawl space hatch and dropped a ragged flare in after it. There was no scream, no burst of motion, just a low, thick smoke that rolled back out like exhaled breath, and then silence. I left the hatch open overnight, bricks at the ready, flashlight on. Nothing moved, no creaks, no fingers, no shifting blankets. For a whole day and night, I started to believe I'd done it. Then Charlie disappeared. I woke up the next morning and he was just gone. The front door was locked, no open windows, no signs of struggle, just a smear of moisture on the floor near the base of the couch where he'd slept. A few strands of wet hair and one of his teeth, still intact, laying by the couch leg like an offering. I dropped to my knees, not crying, not even angry, just hollow. That thing had waited for me to stop watching, waited for me to feel safe, and it had taken him. I stood in the doorway for almost an hour, staring at the hallway. Every room sealed, every wall lined, every floorboard screwed down, and still it got in. The plywood under the kitchen sink was warped, not burned, warped. The insulation had pressed through it from the inside, bulging outward like a cyst. I pried at the edge, just enough to look beneath. There was no floor beneath that cabinet anymore, just a wet hole. I sat on the floor beside it, listening. For the first time, I thought I heard something deeper than the usual shifting and creaking, breathing, slow, wet, like lungs full of mold. The plywood pulsed. It hadn't died, it had just spread. I went under again. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body screamed not to, but I had no other choice. It had taken Charlie. It had taken my space, my house, my mind, and now it was expanding, growing, spreading through walls, between floorboards, beneath appliances. I couldn't keep sealing holes forever, so I went back in. The crawlspace hatch was still open from the night I dropped the flare. The surrounding grass had died in a perfect ring, soaked in kerosene. I shoved aside the bricks and knelt down, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. This time I brought a rope. I tied it to the porch rail behind me and looped the end around my belt. If I got stuck, if something pulled, I wanted a fighting chance. The first 10 feet felt the same as before. Low beams, dirt floor, cobwebs clinging to my neck and ears. But deeper in, past the blackened patch where the fire had scorched the insulation, everything changed. It was soft, not mud, not ash. Wet insulation. It had spread across the dirt like a blanket, and it squished under my knees with every movement. The flashlight beam bounced across folds of it, yellowed, soaked, embedded with hair, teeth, bones, things I couldn't identify. It wasn't a den anymore. It was a body. The Shuckhole wasn't just hiding under the house. It was the crawl space now. I kept going. 15 feet in, the ceiling dipped so low I had to lie flat and drag myself with my elbows. My shirt soaked through instantly. The smell was suffocating. Urine, mildew, and something sour like spoiled milk left in a plastic bag. Then the fingers came. Not grabbing, not even moving toward me. Just there, pressing up through the blanket of insulation, spaced apart like they were waiting for me to place something in their palms. They flexed weakly, rhythmically, like sea anemones in still water. I slid around them, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the narrow tunnel ahead. And then I saw it, the center of it, a pulsing mass about the size of a mattress, pressed between 3 concrete support columns. It looked like a giant stomach turned inside out, heaving and twitching in slow waves. Dozens of fingers protruded from its folds, not attached, just growing out of it. The flashlight flickered. I smacked it once and the beam steadied and landed on something piled beside the mass. Charlie's collar. The blue nylon strap, soaked and crushed, embedded with hair. The tag bent, teeth marks on the buckle. No blood, no body, just the collar. I reached for it. Before I could touch it, a hand erupted from the mass. Not from the side, not from a vent or pipe, from the center of its body. It punched through like a grub burrowing out of an egg. The fingers brushed the air between us. I yanked backward, fell into the wet sprawl of insulation, and scrambled up on my elbows. That hand didn't grab. It offered, palm up, waiting. I kicked it. The thing recoiled, not from pain, but from confusion, like it didn't understand the rejection. More hands began to push up through the ground all around me, as if summoned by that insult. Some were small, childlike. Others were bloated and fused together. One brushed my leg. I screamed, loud, instinctive, and scrambled backward into the narrow tunnel, dragging myself by the rope. The flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of teeth embedded in the floor, of faces pressed beneath the translucent surface of its skin. And then something moved behind me. A mass of it, not fast, not loud, just present. I didn't turn around. I pulled myself, elbows slick, knees skidding. The rope jerked tight as I reached the lip of the hatch and clawed up into daylight. The air outside hit me like a punch to the lungs, clean, hot, alive. I didn't stop. I rolled, got to my feet, and kicked the crawlspace hatch closed. Then I grabbed the pry bar and hammered a 6-inch nail through the frame into the ground. Then another, then another. I didn't breathe until I was 3 nails deep and covered in sweat. I left the rope in place. I didn't want it anymore. I walked the perimeter of the house, hammering nails through every board of skirting I could reach. I sprayed foam into every hole. I jammed broken bricks under every edge. The house groaned, not from settling, from shifting. That night I didn't stay inside. I sat in my truck with the windows rolled up, parked at the edge of the yard, watching the house with a flashlight and crowbar in my lap. I stayed awake until morning. Nothing moved. But I knew it was down there, waiting again, not angry, just waiting. I didn't go back inside the house for 2 days. I stayed in my truck with the engine off, windows cracked, flashlight by my side. Slept in fits, waking at every creak of the porch boards or rustle of leaves. I only left once to fill a gas can and grab canned food from the corner store. When the clerk asked how I was doing, I just stared past him, didn't speak, didn't know how to explain what had taken up residence beneath my life. On the third morning, I decided to go back in, not to live, but to see. I had to know what it had done with the rest of my things, what it took, what it kept. The house smelled stale, like something wet had dried into the drywall and left behind a permanent sour. I moved room to room slowly, not touching anything. Nothing looked obviously disturbed at first. No footprints, no slime, no broken walls. Then I noticed the piles, not under the furniture, inside it, inside drawers, cabinets, the closet in the hallway, behind picture frames that I hadn't touched in weeks, tucked beneath the mattress I hadn't slept on since the first incident. Neat little piles of objects. One drawer contained 6 of my socks, none of them matching, each rolled and placed like fruit. Beneath them, 3 of my business cards folded into triangles. The pantry shelf held a row of old spoons, each one crusted in food residue, not from recent use, from weeks ago. Spoons I'd thought I'd lost in the sink. On the floor beside the shelf was a pair of fingernail clippers. The handle was chewed. The cutting edge had blood on it. Under the bathroom sink, where I'd seen the insulation in the finger days ago, was a stack of lint balls. Hair, 2 empty pill bottles, the ring I'd worn in high school and hadn't seen in a year. That was when it hit me. It hadn't taken these things by mistake. It kept them, like a collector. It wasn't eating them or destroying them. It was arranging them, categorizing, treasuring. Every object was something I'd once reached for, or dropped, or knelt beside. The Shuckhole didn't just wait for contact, it remembered it. I made it to the bedroom, still sealed shut from before. The tape along the floor was peeled back again, like fingers had slid up and under, testing the barrier. I braced myself and opened the door. The smell inside was worse than the crawl space, rotting damp, stagnant air thick with dust. I kept my shirt over my nose and stepped inside. The entire floor was layered in insulation, not laid flat, folded like bedding, moldy, yellowed with jagged seams and gray blotches where moisture had soaked through. It pulsed slightly when I stepped on it, like sponge. And in the center of the room, placed in a perfect circle on the insulation, were more of my things. A screwdriver I'd lost under the fridge, the spoon from the vent, Charlie's collar, a pair of my boxer briefs, a rusted butter knife, all positioned like some bizarre altar. Not haphazard, intentional. I couldn't breathe. I stepped back and accidentally knocked a lamp off the nightstand. It hit the floor and rolled. Before I could stop myself, I crouched to grab it and froze. There was a vent directly below me. A faint warmth pulsed up through the slats. The lamp kept rolling toward the edge, then it stopped, like something caught it. I stood up slowly, and in that moment, I realized something worse than anything I'd seen so far. It was trying to make the house comfortable for me. It wasn't just waiting anymore. It was curating, adapting the environment, not hunting me, not threatening me, but learning me. That night I went back to the truck, sat in the cab and stared at the house until dawn. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see the creature. I saw the room, the way it mimicked comfort, the way it knew what belonged to me and what didn't. The next morning I returned and checked the closet in the hallway, the one with the lowest vent, the one Charlie used to bark at. I pulled it open slowly, bracing for the smell, for the crawl of something beneath my skin. Instead, I found something wrapped in cloth, old insulation, rolled tightly like a towel. I used the tip of a hanger to pry it open. Inside was a jawbone, small, human, still holding 3 tiny teeth. I dropped it, stepped back, Nearly slipped. That pile, that room, it wasn't just a collection of my things. It was everyone's things. All the others it had waited for. The girl Wendell talked about. The cats, the child with the missing fingers, Charlie. It took from them all and kept what made them themselves. A toothbrush, a sock, a shoelace. It didn't need to kill to take, it just needed you to reach. I couldn't live with it anymore. Not under me, not around me. Not curled beneath the floor like some awful parasite, pressing its damp fingers against the places I called home. I'd seen what it took. I'd seen how it waited, and I knew it wouldn't stop. Not because it was malicious, but because it never needed to. That was worse, so I decided to end it. I spent the entire next day prepping the crawl space for what I hoped would be a forced eviction. If it had nerves, I'd burn them. If it had lungs, I'd choke them. If it had roots, I'd rip them out. I bought a weed sprayer from the hardware store and filled it with a cocktail I mixed myself. Industrial degreaser, lye, denatured alcohol, and a splash of ammonia. I wore rubber gloves, 2 shirts, thick jeans, and goggles. It was stupid, reckless, dangerous. But I didn't care. I'd rather go down coughing than live above that thing another night. The sun was just starting to dip when I opened the hatch. No creaking, no response. Charlie's absence pressed behind my ribs. I tied the rope around my waist again, slid in on my elbows, and dragged the sprayer behind me like a leash. Every inch into the crawl space felt like being swallowed. The air was thicker than ever, like a slow rot setting in across wet cotton. The flashlight showed what I expected. The insulation was still pulsing, thicker now, stretched like skin across beams. There were more items in the nest. A pair of socks I hadn't worn in a month, my old belt buckle, a chewed-up dog toy. I stopped 10 feet in, lifted the sprayer nozzle, and pulled the trigger. The chemical stream hissed, cutting a dark line across the Shuckhole's body. There was a sizzling pop, like meat on a pan, and the insulation jerked. For the first time I heard it move, not just shift or settle, but writhe. It didn't scream, it didn't lash out. It recoiled, pulling back into itself like an earthworm hit with salt. Fingers curled into fists and vanished. The folds of cloth retracted, bubbling slightly. I kept spraying. I dragged myself closer and soaked the center mass. It twitched violently now, pulling away from the beam, leaving behind a smear of yellow mucus. My nostrils burned. My eyes watered through the goggles. It began to retreat toward the back of the house. I followed. It wasn't fast. It was big, but clumsy, wet, slug-like. The insulation layer beneath me began to sag, like whatever was inside had shifted weight. I saw one of the sub-tunnels collapse ahead of me, the wall of matted material folding in on itself. I reached the far end of the crawl space, the back corner where the support beams intersected near the foundation. And that's when I saw it. A hole, a deep one, dug into the dirt and shored up with trash and old boards. It sloped downward at a sharp angle and disappeared into blackness. The thing had tunneled deeper. I leaned forward, spraying the entrance of the hole, hoping to flood it with the caustic mix. Something lunged, not at me, just out. A massive slab of insulation-covered flesh burst from the tunnel mouth, slamming into the ground beside me. Dozens of fingers erupted from it, grabbing nothing, waving blindly, twitching in spirals. It wasn't attacking, it was thrashing, dying. I sprayed until the tank emptied, choking on fumes, sweat slicking my back. The fingers writhed once more, then shriveled into themselves like dying roots. The entire mass spasmed and went still. I waited, longer than I needed to. When nothing moved again, I crawled backward, dragging the sprayer with me. I climbed out into the fresh night air, collapsed on the grass and lay there staring at the stars, breathing, laughing a little. Maybe I'd done it. Maybe that was the core, the heart, the brain. Maybe that final burst was its last gasp. It felt like an ending. But when I went back inside, the house didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. The vents were silent. The bedrooms still smelled damp, but nothing new. The piles of collected objects remained in their little shrines. I picked one up, an old receipt I hadn't seen in years, folded into a triangle and stained with mold. I burned it, then another and another. I spent the next several hours dismantling every little shrine, flushing things, burning them in the sink, scrubbing the floors, throwing everything that wasn't mine or wasn't mine anymore into the fire pit outside. By dawn, the house was nearly bare. I opened every window, let the air in, and I waited. That night, I slept on the couch with a kitchen knife under my pillow and the front door unlatched. Nothing came, no creaks, no dragging, no movement under the floor. The next morning, I walked through the house, half expecting to find something new tucked in a shoe or resting behind the microwave. But nothing was missing. Nothing had returned. The only thing I couldn't find was the photo of Charlie I kept on the fridge. It was gone, not stolen, taken. I never found the photo. It wasn't under the fridge, wasn't behind the furniture, wasn't anywhere. It had been pinned to the door with a magnet, just a candid I'd printed years ago of Charlie standing in the snow, his ears up, tongue out, tail blurry from wagging. It had no real value, except to me. I told myself it didn't mean anything, just a breeze from the window, just a scrap of paper that got knocked loose in the cleanup. I told myself that as I checked every drawer, every cabinet, every corner of the house, twice, but I knew better. That was the last thing it took, something small, something personal, something I wouldn't notice was missing until it already knew. The Shuckhole didn't care about size, it cared about attachment, and that photo, more than anything, proved it had never really left. Maybe I'd hurt it, maybe I'd burned part of it out, but I hadn't killed it, it had just gone deeper. I stayed in the house another week. There were no more sounds, no more objects gone, no piles, no fingers. The insulation in the crawl space stopped pulsing. I checked once, just once, and found only silence and the faint stink of old chemicals. But the house still felt full, like something pressed just behind the drywall, listening. I stopped sleeping. One night, I left the front door wide open and sat on the steps until sunrise, hoping to feel air that didn't pass through that thing's mouth first. Even then, the breeze seemed to die before it reached me. When I finally packed up to leave, I took only what I could fit in the truck, a change of clothes, my tools, a few cans of food. I didn't even take my phone. No one was waiting on the other end of the line anyway. I didn't lock the door when I left. Didn't leave a note for the landlord. I drove 5 towns over and paid cash for a 1-bedroom in an apartment complex that sat on a concrete slab. No vents in the floor, no crawl space, no grates. That was 6 months ago. The first thing I did after moving in was stuff every cabinet and crack with steel wool and foam. I bought a dog from a shelter, smaller than Charlie, older, with a missing toe and cloudy eyes. I named her Skip. She doesn't bark much, but she never goes near the heating vents, not even the ones in the wall. Sometimes I drop things on purpose. Coins, pens, paper clips. I stare at them, daring myself to reach. Sometimes I wait until 3:12 a.m. and listen, just in case. And sometimes I think I hear it, not in the walls, not in the floor, but in my habits, the way I crouch, the way I flinch when I lose sight of my keys, the way I move around furniture like something is always just beneath it. That's how it survives, not by killing, not by hunting, but by waiting long enough for you to teach yourself how to kneel again. A week ago, I visited a diner in a different county, took Skip with me, sat near the back. The waitress poured my coffee and asked what brought me through. I said I used to live in East Hollow. She raised an eyebrow. You live in that old blue place with a porch out front? The one with the strange crawl space? I nodded slowly. She smiled, but not in the way that meant anything. A family moved in there last month. Young couple, just had a baby. I froze. My hands were cold. Really? I said. She nodded. Yeah. Husband's a carpenter or something. Said they loved the charm. Said the house just felt right. I didn't finish my coffee. Didn't pay either. Skip and I got in the truck and sat in the lot for a long time. I didn't go back. Wouldn't do any good. They wouldn't listen. Even if I told them what to avoid, how to act, what not to reach for, it wouldn't matter, because it never chases, it just waits for the drop rattle. The bottle that rolls under the crib, the parent that kneels blind and trusting, one hand under the couch. It only ever needs one thing, just one moment where you put your hand where you can't see.